Good morning. How are you? Another week, more movies on the streaming services because, of course, our cinemas are still closed here. Yeah, we'll see. At least for another week. We'll see what happens next week, next weekend. Maybe. I don't know. Anyhow, there's a couple of good things now that we're in August. Everybody's already seen everything on Netflix. So now that we're in August, there's lots of new things to see. I'm going to be busy this week watching new movies. Exciting. But there's a few good things that you should actually check out. And the first one is a Canadian documentary called Gordon Lightfoot, If You Could Read My Mind. Now, this is not screening. It's not available on every Netflix in every Netflix market, as far as I know. So you might need to look for it. I'm not sure, but it is well worth checking out. One of the first 45. Remember, kids. There used to be these little album records called 45s. Okay, back in the days. And one of the first 45s I ever bought was Gordon Lightfoot's If You Could Read My Mind. And the year was 1971. Yes, I was actually around in 1971. I was barely a teenager. Actually, that was the year I became a teenager. And I just loved the vibrato of his voice. I didn't even know what the word vibrato meant back then, but I did know that I liked it when I heard it. Little did I suspect at the time that that first international hit of his was about the breakup of what would be his first of 3 marriages. I didn't know that, but I just loved the song. And in fact, I didn't even know that at all until I watched this documentary. Now, called Gordon Lightfoot, If You Could Read My Mind, it covers not just that little bit of music trivia, but a whole lot more about the folk pop singer-songwriter. He's still alive. He comes from the small town of Orillia, Ontario. Don't bother looking up on Google Maps because I'll tell you where Orillia, Ontario is. It's about 130 kilometers north of Toronto. It straddles 2 lakes, Lake Simcoe and Lake Couchiching. We used to have a cottage on Lake Couchiching back in the 1960s. I barely remember it. But I do remember going up there. But Orillia, there was also a burger place up in Orillia that we used to go to. Can't remember the name of that burger place. I'm sure it's still there. So that's where he comes from. And he began his career in the late 1940s as a choir boy in the family's church. Now, he knew early on that this is what he wanted for his career. He wanted to be a musician. And when he was barely 20 years old, he moved himself to Hollywood, California, where he studied music composition and orchestration. And he's still around. I think he's actually still writing because I believe on his new album, which just came out a few months ago, I think there's some new songs on there. He writes about love, loss, loneliness, life in general. And Lightfoot quickly developed a reputation as a gifted songwriter on par with Bob Dylan, who himself was up and coming at the time. Now, one of Lightfoot's earliest works, Early Morning Rain, or I think he called it In the Early Morning Rain, but I think everybody else called it Early Morning Rain. It was a bigger hit for such performers as Ian and Sylvia, Peter, Paul and Mary. If you don't know the folk scene, you don't even know who I'm talking about. Bob Dylan himself, Elvis, and even Jerry Lee Lewis. Then it was for him. Gordon Lightfoot didn't even sing this or didn't even record this song until much later. And it wasn't until Warner Brothers released If You Could Read My Mind as a single that his career really took off outside of Canada. In Canada we knew who he was, but outside of Canada nobody really knew until this song. Now, the film is very entertaining and the music is, of course, fabulous. But I felt it was a little bit straightforward in its structure. It's basically talking heads for most of it. And I felt it could have benefited a little bit more from creativity from the directors Martha Kehoe and Joan Tassoni. These are 2 women. They've worked with Lightfoot for years. They've known him. They've worked with him for years. To me, if you're making a film called If You Could Read My Mind, that just lends itself to a whole lot of creativity where you can get into his mind and be very, very creative with notes sort of dropping down from his brain to the page. Whatever, I don't want to get cliche here. But I think it could have been a bit more creative than just talking heads. But the film features a cavalcade of talking heads that includes such Canadian music legends as Burton Cummings from the Guess Who, Randy Bachman, also from Guess Who and Bachman Turner Overdrive, Ian and Sylvia Tyson, Geddy Lee, who has the best line in the movie, hands down, Alex Lifeson, do I have to tell you who these people are? Anne Murray, Sarah McLachlan, Murray McLachlan, Tom Cochran, and Ronnie Hawkins, among others. And all of them are saying in this film how much Lightfoot influenced their own careers. Now, curiously, and I'm not the only one who found this weird, Alec Baldwin is in the film. And he's neither a musician, nor is he Canadian, and he's seen a few times throughout the film waxing lyrically about Lightfoot. Now, maybe he's acting as the audience's surrogate. Otherwise, I mean, I have no idea why he's there. I think I do know why he's there, because he does know the two directors. So they thought, oh, let's put Alec Baldwin in this film. He didn't belong there. I like Alec Baldwin, but he didn't belong in this movie. So, anyhow, Lightfoot's also on hand to fill in some of the blanks on his life and his career. The man's now just in his 80s. I think he turned 80 last year, or maybe a year before. And he's still doing more than 100 shows a year. Incredible. And although his singing voice doesn't have the same smooth as maple syrup on Sunday pancakes tone that he had back in his prime. He was 81, 82, come on. Now, his former hard drinking, hard smoking, and hard partying ways are clearly visible on his wizened face. But he and others in the know say that he's been embracing a healthy lifestyle for almost 40 years now. Honestly, if you would see him on the street, you would think he sleeps on the street. I mean, he really looks bad. But anyhow, you know what? I know people in Toronto who say they see him coming out of a gym in downtown Toronto. So, you know, he really does work out. Now, Lightfoot, until now, has been really reticent to discuss his private life. That includes 6 children from 3 marriages and 2 relationships. One of those relationships being with Kathy Smith, the woman who injected John Belushi with those fatal speedballs and went to jail for it. Now, Lightfoot's 1974 hit, Sundown, again, I didn't know this, was written with Smith in mind. Now, his current wife, Kim, whom he married in 2004, she can be seen and heard just on the fringes of the camera's viewfinder. So, you know, he doesn't really like to talk so much about his private life, but he did open up a little bit in this film. Now, even with its shortcomings, I think this is still well worth watching. And if you're Canadian, it should be required viewing. So all you Canadians out there, fellow Canadians, check this out. It's called Gordon Lightfoot, If You Can Read My Mind. As I said, it's currently on Netflix, but not everywhere. So you might have to look for it. So, yeah, if you love his music, you're going to love this movie, this documentary. The other film I'm going to talk about today, well, not a film, it's a TV series, a miniseries, that landed on Netflix a couple of weeks ago. It's a Polish series called The Woods, and it's based on an American novel of the same name by author Harlan Coben. Well, it's not an American novel, it's a novel by an American writer, Harlan Coben, from 2007. Now, who doesn't love a good murder mystery? I mean, you know, it's funny, I rarely buy a murder mystery book, but I do enjoy them. I don't know why I never buy them. You know, and I think probably because most people do like murder mysteries, it's no surprise that his books have been adapted into TV miniseries all over the world. Now, this one, The Woods, is the 7th such adaptation, and apparently there's a hell of a lot more to come. He signed a 5-year deal with Netflix to develop 14 of his titles into series and films. So we're going to see a lot more of Harlan Coben's characters in the coming years. Now, in this story, The Woods, we have Paweł Kapinski. He's a successful government prosecutor in Warsaw, Poland. Now, just as an aside, in the book his name is Paul Copeland, and he lives in New Jersey. So Paul Copeland is now Paweł Kapinski, and New Jersey is now Warsaw. Now, the widowed father of a little girl is knee-deep, or maybe he's even more than knee-deep, in a high-profile rape case involving the son of a famous news investigator when he gets called to the morgue by the police. And a man named Marek Kowalski, I forget what the guy's name is, probably Mark something in the book, I don't know. Marek Kowalski has been found murdered, and documents with Pavel's name on them were found on the body. Now, Pavel sees the man and identifies him as his old friend Arthur Perkowski. Arthur Perkowski. Now, back in 1994, 25 years previous, the two of them were chaperones at a camp for teenagers run by David Goldstein. Oh, that's David Goldstein, I think is how you pronounce it in Polish, but in English pronunciation, David Goldstein. One fateful night, the four teenagers went into the neighboring forest, and two were found murdered the next morning. The other two, Artur and Pavel's sister Kamila, went missing, never to be seen again. And for 25 years, Pavel has been haunted by his sister's disappearance. Now, with Artur lying on the slab in front of him in the morgue, Pavel wonders if Kamila has been alive all this time. So this leads Pavel to start investigating the case and revisit memories and relationships that he thought were best left in the past. That's what it's about. Now, there's 6 episodes in this series. It says season 1. I don't think there's a season 2. So, so there's 6 episodes. Each one runs between 45 and 55 minutes. So let's call it 50 down the middle. So it's not a long, it's not long. It's pretty easy viewing. You can probably binge it in 1 or 2 nights. Do not watch the dubbed version, though. I watched the subtitle version, which was fine, but I've read online some people who did watch the dubbed version were very disappointed. So try to get the subtitle version. Now, from the opening scene, we're drawn into Pavel's world as he finds new clues to the murders and chases down leads. Now, the story jumps back and forth between 1994 and today, using 2 sets of actors for Pavel and his old flame Lara Goldstein, who's David's daughter. And she's now a university professor. Now, back in 1994, you have the adults who were the parents and the adults back then. They're the same actors in 2019. They de-aged they didn't de-age. I think it was all done with makeup. I don't think they used CGI to de-age the actors. So they made them younger, but then in 2019 they're the same actors. The adults, not the kids became new actors. So Laura, meanwhile, she too gets roped into the mystery when one of her students anonymously submits an essay detailing her and Pavel's tryst in the woods that night. So the question is, who knew about this, and why all of a sudden is this now coming to the fore? So that's one of the mysteries of this mystery. Now, for the most part, The Woods is highly rewarding fare with solid performances and slick production values throughout. This was really, really well done. We don't get to see Polish films that often here in Hong Kong, but this one was really, really well done. The story, however, goes a little bit off the rails at the end of the 5th episode when the reveals start coming, and of course they have to, because episode 6 is the last one. So, when the first of the reveals came at the end of episode 5, I was going, no. But anyhow, it is what it is. Now, the dialogue too gets a bit wonky, and it a little bit too often. It relies on this sort of trope of, I have something really important to... No, let me do it this way. I have something really important to tell you, but I can't do it over the phone, so meet me in an abandoned building at 7 p.m. Come on, just tell the person what it is. That drives me crazy when they do that. And to me, it's so cliche. So I didn't like that. Now, there's also a question of whether Pavel has a superpower of flight, because there's one scene where he watches his father drive off in his car to the woods, and then the next scene, Pavel's in the woods with his father. And you think, how did he get there? He doesn't have a car. Did he get there by skateboard? Did he fly? So, there were a few things like that where you're thinking, no, that doesn't work. Now, some viewers have taken exception to the story's ambiguous ending. I didn't have a problem with it. I thought it was quite good the way it ended. You might be a little bit angry. We'll see what happens. My bigger issue was how Pavel suddenly remembers things that are really important to finding out who's behind the murder. That drove me crazy. We're going back, Pavel's revisiting these memories, and all of a sudden he remembers something that's really key, and you think, you couldn't have remembered that a few episodes back? Of course, if he had remembered it a few episodes back, it would have been a 2-episode miniseries and not a 6-episode miniseries. So I had to drag it out a little bit. But that really drove me crazy. But all in all, I really enjoyed it. I thought the acting was great, the production was great, the story, okay, it's got a few kinks in it, but I thought it was good. So I highly recommend it. So it's called The Woods. It's available now on Netflix. A friend of mine here in Hong Kong watched it the other night. She loved it. So, check it out. Well worth it. So there's two things that for you to check out, both of them on Netflix. Gordon Lightfoot, If You Could Read My Mind, and The Woods. So all is not lost. This weekend I'm going to watch An American Pickle, Seth Rogen's film, and the Rental, which I still haven't gotten around to watching. I promise I'll watch it. Talk about it next week. Have a good weekend. Have a good week. See ya. Wear your mask.